Welcome, everyone, back to another episode of the Evoke cast. This week, my special guest is Evoke coach Nikki LaRochelle. And for those of you that don't know Nikki or haven't worked with her, she's been coaching for us for a number of years. And she has a really strong background, especially in ski mountaineering, having been a member of the U.S. national team and raced in the World Cup circuit. But also she's kind of a local legend there in Colorado because she's a multi-time winner of both the Grand Traverse and the Power of Four. Those are ski mountaineering races. But the Grand Traverse is also held in the summertime on bicycle and running, and two different races. And Nikki has the distinction of one year having won the Triple Crown, they call, for the fastest combined time of all three events, beating all the men. So that's quite an accomplishment. But I think probably one of Nikki's most proud accomplishments is that she's a mother of two darling little girls. So welcome, Nikki. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Scott. That was a nice intro. I couldn't possibly list all your accolades, so we'll
You
leave it
don't
be for
need,
now. Maybe another podcast.
yeah, maybe a long time in the future. Um, Well, let's dive right into these questions. We got a bunch of great questions again this month. And folks that are listening, maybe for the first time, this is something we do on a monthly basis. And it's part of our mission to provide as much free information about training as we can to try to combat all the terrible misinformation that's out there on the internet about training for endurance sports. So, you know, if you have questions, you can direct messages on Instagram at Evoke Endurance, or you can email them in to coach at Evoke Endurance, and we will put those on our list and get to them probably, we try to do this every month, so we should be able to get to them, that same month. So we look forward to hearing from you because this is why we do what we do. Well, you want to start right off, Nikki?
Yeah, I'll read the first question. Okay, so it says, I have been using a Stairmaster for the muscular endurance workouts in the 24-week mountaineering plan and have found a pace I can maintain for 60 minutes without holding onto the machine. Each week, I've been gradually increasing the weight of my pack to continue progressing. I'm wondering, is there a point where I should stop increasing the pack weight and start increasing the Stairmaster speed instead?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll explain how I normally do this. Um, if you started off and you're like me, and I don't have particularly strong legs, and I can't do those workouts with very much weight. Probably um, when I start a series on the stair machine, I would probably be using 10%, so maybe, or 15%, so maybe 20 pounds to get started because these workouts are brutal, both physically and mentally. So if you get that kind of low grade burn where the legs are definitely the limitation to the speed you can go, it doesn't matter whether you're using, 10 pounds or 100 pounds. That's not important. What's important is you get to this sort of low grade burn that you can sustain for an hour. But what I prefer to do is that you should, once you get that pack weight figured out, what I prefer to do is see that I'm going farther each week. So your speed will increase. And on a Stairmaster, they have those, I think it's called a level, as I remember. It's been a few months or a year since I did one, but they've got levels. And so you would be at, 8 or whatever. And I don't know there's kind of an arbitrary thing. I think they're like steps per minute or something. But anyway, I would look to be going farther in that hour rather than continuing to increase weight. Um, and that's what I do with people that are doing this workout outdoors is the same thing as I will have them, once they've established the weight that they're going to be using, um, and they are going back to the same steep hill where what I used to do on a particular piece of terrain that I had that was quite steep. Any of you have ever seen the video of me doing a muscular endurance um, climb or hike on YouTube? It was back when I was at Uphill Athlete, and our coach our coach Seth was filming it. You'll see that I was having a conversation with Seth, but I was not able to go any faster because my legs were the limit. And that piece of dirt was almost 1,000 meters, and the average angle was 50% grade, so it's very steep. Now, that's about the limit to how steep you could go outdoors because otherwise the footing gets crazy. One of the benefits of the stair machine is the gradient of the stair machine is about 80 to 100, somewhere in the 80 to 100% range, depending on the brand. And so you could never hike up a 100% grade outside. So 100% grade would be a 45-degree angle. Um, and so that's why I think these Stairmaster workouts are so really effective, and you just don't need that much of them. But back to what I was just saying about what I did when I was doing this would be I'd hike up with the weight, and in that particular workout, I think we even did this, that one that was videoed. Um, at the top, at an hour, I would build a little cairn a small cairn out of rocks. And then I'd come back a week or so later and I would notice that, oh, I just passed my 1 hour Karen and it's only, 52 minutes. So I'd go for another 8 minutes and then I'd make a new Karen. I'd do a new high point. And I'd continue to do that. And I've seen lots of other folks with this, they would see pretty significant increases in the amount of vertical they could cover in an hour, even, just on a weekly basis. So that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but I think it helps explain why you're looking for speed here. We want to have you be able to go uphill faster.
And
Is
Scott,
that
something that came to mind as you were talking was a previous conversation you and I had about your work with runners like Ruth Croft or Martina Valmasoy, who you're sort of curating it more to a long distance ultra. So
yeah?
getting the benefit of a workout like this, but leaning more into the lighter weight and faster speed. Like, is that something I think you should talk a little about that? I thought that was so.
Sure. I mean, this question sounded like it's for a mountaineer because he's using the 24-week mountaineering plan. But yes, in the past when I originally developed this idea was a test for myself in the early 90s, and I was getting ready to go to K2, and I was working like crazy, didn't have a lot of time to train. And so I started picking these workouts that I thought would be the most effective. And one of them was this weighted uphill hike where I'd carry water and dump it out at the top and run back down. And there was a river at the bottom, so I could fill it up and do that again. And it was incredibly effective for me when I got on the mountain. Um, and so that became a staple. Like when I first started coaching Steve House, that was one of the principal workouts I used. In fact, he did it on the same hill that I used to do mine on, 10 years before. But um, over the years, we've used this for hundreds, if not thousands, of mountaineers with very much success. But about, I don't know, a couple, 3 years ago, I started playing around with this idea. Well, could we do this with mountain runners as well? We don't want to have the weight so heavy that they're moving so slowly that it's way slower than their, kind of race specific speed. So we will drop the weight down but it's still going to be in the range of 10% of body weight or maybe a little heavier. Like for Ruth, it's probably even a little heavier than 10% or than 15%, because I think we're using 10 kilos for her. And we also don't do it on just, ridiculously steep terrain. We try to do it on steep trails, but trails where, you're going to either be running slowly or walking uphill with poles. And we found it to be very, very effective, and gives a great benefit to the athletes so that, then when they go back to that same hill that a few days before they did it with, 10 kilos on their back or something. Now they're running up the hill with no weight on, and you just feel like you're flying up the hill. So I do think there's some real benefit here, and we'll probably continue to use this. It seems to we get great feedback from the athletes.
That's great. It's neat to hear the way you still experiment. I mean, you bring a level of creativity to the training, and I love that. Like this is a newer sort of method you've implemented. So, relatively speaking, over the course of your career.
Well, I think of more rather than creativity, I think it's sadism. So I have this stable of athletes I can try this stuff out on, or have. That's really how I've developed a lot of these ideas, either trying it on myself or trying it on athletes. And one of the things I like this particular workout, if I integrate this kind of training into an elite athlete's program for several months, and then they go and race and they say, I have never felt so strong on the hills before. Then I go, okay, if you can do anything to an elite athlete that makes them see a significant performance gain, then that might be a good tool to use for a lot of other people as well. You don't have to be an elite athlete to do these kinds of workouts, but the elites make really good guinea pigs. So yeah, we'll call it sadism rather than creativity.
I like that.
Um, Okay, well, let's jump on to the next one is from Kristen. Um, and I'd like to have you answer this one because I think it's right up your alley. And it's one we get a lot. And she's saying, do you have any practical tips on motivation? I really struggle to get out the door some days, and I'm wondering if there are any good strategies that I can lean on.
I'd say first off, Kristen is not alone. Even the most dedicated athletes have days when motivation is low, so that's completely normal. I actually wanted to share my three very practical suggestions that come from my own experience, which the first one is I think on days when I wake up and I'm feeling really unmotivated, I think really critically around where I want to train. So say say I'm not motivated, well, I might lean into hiking more than running, and I might figure out my favorite place to hike, and I really prioritize picking an inspiring place to go. I think that can work really well. I think a second thing, say you're training at lunch or after work, just the simple act of changing your clothes can be so effective. So often when I used to have like a 9 to 5 job, I would bring my clothes into the workplace and change them before I left work. And that at times made all the difference whether or not I went or didn't go. And often I noticed when I had my clothes on, I wanted to go more. So these are just very practical thoughts on this. And then the third, which is like a mantra for my entire life. My husband and I use it as a verb. We say we David Goggins it, which is just like butch up and make it happen. Like, don't make excuses. Don't let your mood dictate your choice making. I mean, when you do that, our mood, and if you're saying, oh, I don't feel like it, you just lose all your power and all your agency as a person. If you say, I have a goal, I have an objective, I have a race, and this is part of succeeding at that goal, I need to just go do it. And oftentimes you might feel like crap at the beginning, but it wears off, or the worst part is like deliberating about the choice to go do it. And then once you're doing it, you're not even thinking about that anymore. And I think I'm at a current stage in my life where I have so many things going on. I've never felt so busy. And the David Goggins verb has
Mhm.
made things work for me by just making it happen and not letting myself lean into emotion. And I've heard the quote, action does not follow mood, mood follows action. And I really like that. Those are my three. What are yours, Scott? What's your answer to that question?
Um, yeah, those are great. I like those, but I also want to come at it from maybe a slightly more cautionary um,
Ah,
point or direction, and that is that you need oftentimes when our motivation is low, And let's say you're normally a highly motivated person to go out and train. I mean, you love the whole process of training. And then on some days you don't feel that way. That's usually a sign that your body is telling you that, hey, maybe we need to take it easy today, because you're probably, your energy level is a bit lower. But what I will still encourage people to do is go out and do the warm up. And then, don't make the decision when you're still lying in bed, unless you're sick as a dog or something, or you can really tell, hey, I'm so exhausted, I shouldn't be going out to train today. But, give it, like Nikki was saying, give it a chance. Get out there, warm up, 15, 20 minutes. And what I have found is when I'm tired, I need a much longer warm up. It could easily be a half an hour of easy hiking before I feel ready to, run and run hard. But what I do during that, let's say normally 15 to 20-minute warm up, is I'm assessing, how do I actually feel? Am I feeling better? Because then I'm in a better position to make a judgment about whether I need to, am I so tired that I need to completely abandon the idea of doing anything today and go back and get in bed? Or is it just, okay, I'm kind of tired today, and even though I thought I was going to be able to go do these intervals, I'm actually just going to go for an easy jog, because I can tell my legs aren't recovered from what I did 4 days ago, something like that. But I think that it's better to make that decision after a warm up. But I often find, like, those days when I get out there and I'm warming up, and during the warm up I can tell, oh yeah, I'm definitely not ready for that workout I thought I had planned for today. So I'll just do this very, very easy. And it could be, it might even just be walking. Um, but what I'll find is, at the end of that hour-long walk, instead of an hour-long run, I'll actually feel a lot better than when I started. So I think it's really, for me, it's something I have to adjust on a daily basis based on how I feel. But it is, the big thing I think is, as you were pointing out, the mood. But the mood can be influenced by fatigue. We see that all the time with athletes that we coach. And now if you're in a situation where you're not always, not normally really psyched to get out there, and you're struggling, then I think for sure you have to do what Nikki is saying. If, on the other hand, you're normally very excited to get out and train, and you're, thinking about it from the moment you wake up, what you're going to do that day, and then there's a particular day when you just don't feel that same urge, that's a cautionary, like, yellow flag, I think.
That you're so much more gentle, Scott. I'm like, just
Just
for
get out there and do it. Yes. And
no, you're
and
right.
that
That's an important distinction between the two. Like if you're typically motivated and not, or vice versa. I suppose I was speaking to the person that routinely struggles.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. That
but
that
you're
and
right.
that is then you're exactly 100% on. If you're kind of new to training and exercising on a daily basis, and you haven't, you do struggle with this, with the motivation thing frequently, then yes, you kind of need a kick in the pants and just get out the door and goggins it, like you
Yeah.
were saying. Um,
I think there's just a sort of a pervasive like ethos of this self-care idea, which I think absolutely has its place, but um like always defaulting to what feels the best might actually be antithetical to what's actually best for you. So I think
mhm.
thinking critically about it is important. I hope I don't sound
Yeah.
like a jerk, but
No, no, I think it's really important. It's good to have different viewpoints on this. But what I see, most of the people that are attracted to the kind of sports that we like to do are pretty type A personalities.
yeah.
And that's where I've kind of reached this conclusion, or learned this lesson over many years, that if you have a type A person for whom more is almost always, or is always better, and then one day they don't feel so like getting out there and doing stuff, that's definitely a yellow flag for me, or even a red flag. It's like, okay, something is going on. Maybe you're getting sick and you don't know it yet, or maybe you didn't sleep well, or whatever. But It's really been for me dealing with type A athletes for so many years. Um, and especially at the elite level, as you know very well, Nikki, when you're training twice a day, and you're putting all this energy, for 15 to 20 hours a week into your training, and there's barely time to eat and sleep and recover between workouts, it you have to embrace the training, the process of getting fit. Like, it's great to have goals out there in the distant future, a race or a mountain you want to climb or something like that. But if you don't really love the process of getting there, it's going to be tough because endurance training, just by its very definition, is about suffering. Um, and so you kind of need to get good. It's really about getting good at suffering.
Absolutely. I totally agree. That was a great question. I like that one.
Yeah, it is a good. It's a one, but also one of the trickier ones to answer because we're dealing with psychology now, and there's not a lot of black and white when it comes to psychology.
Oh, sure. Sure. Okay. Next question. I think this question's great. I can't wait to hear how you answer it. So, it's I find during the prescribed 12-second hill sprint workouts, I'm unable to quote unquote reach the line after my fifth or sixth sprint. 8 is the default number. I'm curious to hear thoughts on what is the limiter for fatigue on these, and do we think it matters for the ultra athlete if the purpose of these is to build power? Thanks.
Yeah, that is a great question, and we get this kind of question about hill sprints frequently. When it says 8 is the default number, I'm not sure where that is stated as a default. Maybe it's in one of our training plans, or I'm not sure. But disregard that. However, you've come to believe that 8 is some magic number, forget it. I mean, if you can't reach the line after five or six sprints, then you have done the job of that workout. You have fatigued the faster twitch fibers that you're trying to learn to recruit, and they've become exhausted. They can no longer do the work. And if you continue doing these, all you're doing is training yourself to, maybe push harder, but go slower. And they don't give the awards in races to the people who push harder. They give awards to the people that run the fastest or ski the fastest or climb the fastest. And so we don't want to be training ourselves to just grit our teeth and suffer along slowly. We would rather train ourselves to be able to go faster and especially with less effort. So that's why I came to this conclusion of let's just make a line in the dirt after your second one or third one, whenever you feel like you've gotten warmed up. And then when you can't reach that, you've done your job. And this is a excuse me, this is a struggle for most endurance athletes because like I just was talking about in that previous question, endurance is about enduring and suffering for a long time. And people will think, well, how can 12 seconds do anything? Or how can only 5 or 6 repetitions of this actually do anything? Well, it's doing something because you're getting fatigued at it. And what's happening is those very fastest fibers, most powerful, faster, strongest fibers that allow you to bound up the hill like that, they don't have much endurance. So they can't go a long time. And what I often see with endurance athletes when the first time I have them do these workouts, for many of them that don't have any kind of a speed type of a background, is they'll go, I could do these all day. I'm taking 3 minutes rest in between. I walk down and here I am on the 12th or 15th one, and my gosh, this workout's taking forever. I don't feel like I'm getting anything out of it. Those are the people that need these even more the most because they aren't even able to recruit those fast twitch fibers. They're doing these hill sprints so slowly because they don't have their power. So they're really just using slow twitch fibers or slower. I will put them, fibers on the slower end of the fiber continuum. And those fibers don't get tired in 8, 12 seconds or 15 seconds. They don't even get tired in, 20 seconds. So the people who say, yeah, these don't make me tired, those are the ones who, what I'll find is after 4 or 5 weeks of this, they go, oh, now I'm feeling it. Now my legs get tired after six or something. But I have found this to be a really useful workout for all endurance athletes. I don't care if you're a mountaineer or a trail runner, um, because this is like the most specific strength training that you can do because and it's really power training, not strength, but it can fall into that kind of general category of strength training. There's nothing you can do in a gym other than maybe, well, one way I've done this with people who don't have a good hill for this is we'll do, a lot of gyms these days have sleds where you can put weights on the sled and then you put a harness on and you pull the sled. So that's another good way to do this if you don't have access to a hill. But that's kind of the only thing I know of that you can do in a gym that will simulate the same kind of power training effect that we're getting here.
Yeah, and Scott, I'm curious how this in your mind relates to the concept of speed reserve, which maybe you've explained before, but the way I understood that was essentially the difference between your maximum sprinting speed and your goal race pace and like the interface between those two. Is that on par with how you think of it? And does that relate to this question?
Well, yes, I think you understand the concept of speed reserve, and I think I have spoken about it in the past, but I'll make it really quick here. So speed reserve, as you just said, is the difference between your it doesn't have to be your actual sprinting speed, but let's say your fastest, mile time or whatever, and the speed you need to sustain in your event. And the difference, the greater the difference in that, then the higher your maximum speed is, the easier your event specific speed is going to feel to you. Now, the hill sprints, I think of more as running economy training because they develop this power. They're kind of like doing strides when you're running, except that they're like strides on steroids because you're working so much against gravity. But what I believe happens, or not I believe, I know happens, is that by building a more powerful legs, you travel further through the air. So your stride length becomes longer. And so increasing stride length is one of the easiest ways to increase running economy. That means that's the energy cost at running at a particular speed. And this is one of the fastest ways to increase stride length is with this kind of power training. And so that's where I think this can come in really handy, especially for runners, but also, I use this with mountaineers as well frequently. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Yeah. No, that's a great question. And you
Yeah.
said, side note, Midge, your wife, she does some hill sprints. Yes, last time I checked in with you.
Yes. Well, she had a little bout with an injury, but so she doesn't do them as much now, but she used to do them a lot. And I think it's just good to do, strength training in general, and I'm putting power training into that same category, even though they're slightly different. But I believe strength and power training are really important for endurance athletes, and especially important as we age, because strength is something that goes away remarkably fast as we age, power even more so. And so dipping your toe into it or keeping some of these kind of workouts in your program. And the thing about hill sprints is, and strides too, you can do them all year long. You can do them during racing season, even between races. I think they're not that, they're fatiguing on a short-term basis because it's not like going out and running for 2 hours, because running for 2 hours, you're depleting some metabolic resources that need time now to recover. Whereas with these hill sprints, they're not metabolically very taxing. They're more neurologically taxing. Your nervous system is basically shutting down. It said, well, okay, I can't recruit those fibers anymore. And this is something that I've been wanting to do kind of a deeper dive about how fatigue works. I mean, there are many fatigue mechanisms, but the kind of fatigue, like when we fatigue, and let's say we're runners, so just because we have one sport to talk about, but when we fatigue, we slow down. And that's because the as we those faster twitch fibers that allowed us to run at a faster speed once they've become fatigued, and I'll talk about what that means in a minute, they check out. They go sit on the bench. And then you can only recruit these less powerful, slower twitch fibers. So that forces you to have to go slower. Now, by fatigue, what that typically means, if it's not a metabolic effect, like in these 12-second hill sprints, you're not running out of glycogen in these things, although you might by the end of the workout. But typically you're not going to be. It's not an energy problem. The problem is that the nervous system can't produce a strong enough signal to fire these high-powered muscle fibers. And so there's a thing that muscle fibers have called action potential. And that is the amount of voltage, essentially. It's a chemical reaction that creates the signal that jumps across the synapse in the nerves. But there's chemicals, there's enzymes and little pumps that move these chemicals, like it's mainly potassium, calcium are the main ones they get pumped through a membrane, and then they need to be repumped back into the membrane. And over time, those things can deplete. And so when in something that's short and very intense like this, the reason you're slowing down is your nervous system. Those motor nerves that are firing those muscles to help you sprint, it's actually the nerves that are fatiguing. So they can no longer recruit those muscle fibers. So one of the reasons for doing this is to kind of teach to build kind of the neural network to allow these to make the nervous system stronger. So I know that's kind of way down in the rabbit hole there, but I
Well,
think
that's
for
a
some
great.
people it can be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example that comes to mind is a pull-up. Like you
Yeah.
truly reach a point, an inflection point where you can no longer say you do a bunch and there's a point where you can't do any more and it might be
Mhm.
halfway up. And I assume that's when those chemicals are totally depleted. Like
Yeah.
you've reached the end.
Yeah, the calcium pumps stop working. And so whether they're like in the pull up, that is more of a muscular endurance thing, because you're doing, let's say, 10 repetitions or something like that. So it's not sprinting. It's not particularly powerful. Um, so what's happening is in the muscles, they have the same kind of thing. We have basically these pumps that move sodium and potassium, excuse me, potassium and calcium through the cell walls. And if you get and I'm not a biochemist, so I'm not going to get this right, but if you get all of, let's say, the potassium moved to the other side of the membrane, well, now there's nothing left to pump, and it hasn't been able to pump back into the muscle cell. There's nothing there to help that muscle contract. And that, I think, is kind of what's happening. It's not so much neurologic in the pull-up example as it is compared to the sprint. And
Okay.
but one of the things, I mean, you used that protocol that I laid out in training for the new alpinism about developing max strength in pull-ups. And we have you sent me a very cute picture of you doing a pull-up with your daughter, hanging off of you. Um, and the type of training you were doing in that protocol was very low repetition, but quite high load. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the most reps you do in that protocol is 3 in a row.
Yeah,
That's the most. But
yeah.
the adaptation was absolutely remarkable. I think I went from being able to pull up 15 pounds at the start to I think my daughter weighed around 40 pounds. So, I mean, over the course of 8 weeks, and it's fairly minimal in terms of the demand of training. So I recommend anybody do it, even if it's just for fun, because the progress is so clear and obvious.
And that's really, you were training the nervous system to recruit more muscle fibers. And you were doing that with this low rep, high resistance. I think there's no workout that has more than 10 repetitions in it, probably 10 or 12. Um, maybe we do some warm up reps, but in the real working sets, it's not very many. But that is, max strength training like that is nervous system training. It is not, metabolic like what we normally do going out for a run or something.
Yeah. Are you
Well, we've
sure you're
probably
not
beaten
a
that horse to
biochemist?
death. So I'm sorry, Nikki, say that
Oh,
again,
I
please.
said, are you sure you're not a biochemist? You could have fooled me.
Absolutely not. You know who is, though, is Dave Thompson, one of our coaches.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah,
Great to know. I didn't know that.
yeah. So good. Maybe Dave will, he's also the one that edits our podcast. And so he might come back to me and say, no, 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 you got all that wrong. So
Oh,
we'll see. Um,
time will tell.
yeah. Well, the next question is from Karen Loudon. And I'm going to ask this of you, Nikki. And that is, this is again something we hear often from athletes is like, and she's asking, do you have any strategies for dealing with post-expedition or post-event blues?
Yeah, I should clarify I've never done like a large expedition, but this is relatable from a like a key race strategy, how you deal with the feelings afterward. I would say the first step would be normalizing the low feeling that happens. It's totally normal to feel a dip in mood after a big goal or expedition. You've been like laser focused on this objective for weeks or months, and when it's over, it's there's this like lull of it's almost like there's a vacancy, an absence there. I think it can feel quite notable. And what I think about, I also think like after I race, I notice this holistic sort of letdown. I mean, you think about the nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system is so ramped up for a race. It's like firing on all cylinders or an expedition. And then that parasympathetic nervous system comes in, and you have this low and you're trying to wind down. And in that case, you think there's a mental and physical, it's just holistic. It's everything is peaking and then coming down. So it's totally unavoidable. I think normalizing all of that, normalizing that low mood, even agitation. Like I remember leaving races and driving home after and feeling just agitated. Like I had no patience. I felt on edge. I was like a little sweaty and irritable. And I have come to recognize that's just part of what this is, and it's physiological. Something that I think is helpful is giving yourself sort of like a landing plan. So after the event, think ahead about maybe something you could build into your schedule that you might look forward to. Something that's low pressure but feels really grounding or rewarding. So perhaps it's like just social outlets, going to your favorite restaurant. I mean, maybe shifting objectives to something completely different that isn't sport. Um, and then just validating that that downtime is really essential and needed. There's nothing wrong with that. And like for every up, there's the equal down. And then I also think when the time is right, just setting a new goal might be what you need. A lot of people are really goal motivated, and that can work great. If that's appropriate for you, I think that's a really good way to go. So, what's your take,
Yeah.
Scott?
No, that's great. I I think that it's, I mean, I've seen this before in myself, um, of this sort of, post-expedition letdown. Part of it, I think, has been, like you were just saying, you're so, even though an expedition that lasts, a month or 2 months even, you can't be up every single day. But often when you're talking about climbing, there's significant danger involved. So your nervous system is getting really worked hard during that, and you need this downtime and relaxation. So it's kind of that's why these two things are somewhat comparable. Let's say you're doing a 100-mile race or you're going on to climb Mount Everest. I mean, they're different things, but the effect on your body is going to be quite similar. And what I did when I was working with World Cup cross country skiers is that at the end of the season, they just went and did the things that they had not been able to do all season long. Maybe that's climbing, rock climbing. Maybe that's surfing. Maybe that's playing golf. Whatever it is that is fun for them to do that it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with their sport. In fact, the less it has to do with their sport, the better. Um, that I found that's very rehabilitating and allows you then to be like you can return to training when you'll feel that urge and that motivation come back. And you start to get itchy and think, okay, well, I'm really looking forward to training. And this can be really a big deal after, let's say, a bad race, a bad season, a bad expedition. It can be, oftentimes, well, and it's funny because I've seen the opposite thing happen that might be intuitive, and that is you have a bad racing season. So that whole racing season, or at the end of the racing season, and you're feeling, boy, I really didn't do as well as I should have. I'm going to implement this training strategy, this training strategy, and this, that, and all these things and you can get very excited about that. But that can also lead you to just dive into training too soon, too hard. And then, 2 or 3 weeks later, you're going, oh my gosh, I wasn't ready. So be a little cautious with that. But I do think it's important to, like, you have to be able to step away from these are very intense undertakings. And you need to be able to step away from it a little bit. You can't have, I mean, if this is all you have in your life, that is not going to be healthy for you. So, whether it's family, friends, golf, whatever, some kind of a, fun activity that you like to do, I would highly encourage you to do that for a while. And just like, let's say it's this person is asking about running. I would say, don't run a step for a month. Go to the bouldering gym, go play bridge with your friends or whatever it is you like to do, but just don't run for a while.
Yeah.
And then at some point during that month, you will get the urge, go, okay, now I'm feeling it again.
Right. I mean, just to emphasize it, I don't feel like I phrased it well. You did, Scott, but that parasympathetic rebound can look like, I mean, they call it rest and digest. So not fight or
Hmm.
flight. It's sort of like the opposing force. But that can look like this really deep crash, like deep fatigue, brain fog, low motivation. Those are all
Hmm.
signs. Even some degree of depression, I think, could be part of
Oh
this.
yeah, definitely.
But what I
Yeah.
love about what you're saying, and this also fits with an earlier question, Scott, and something I've appreciated about you so much, is you're very athlete centered. So you trust the athlete's intuition and you allow that to sort of guide processes and that are at play. And I think that's so important. And it's worth trusting. So I love that you said that as well.
Yeah, we live with a lot of data, because we coach remotely, we rely on a lot of scientific data. Heart rate, running pace, the vertical you did today, or the distance you ran, or something like that. But I really think that you can't become just so enamored of the data that that's all you look at. You need to be like, how did this feel? How am I responding to the training? There needs to be, even though I'm a very left brain person, I understand the importance of, the feeling, the kind of the I would call it the subjective side of training rather than the objective side. And so that's where it's taken me a while to let my left brain personality accept the fact that the emotional side is really important. But I finally came to that conclusion several years ago.
I would say I'm right-brained, except for when I'm David Gogginsing things, and then I'm no-brained. I'm just on autopilot.
Then you're on autopilot. Yeah.
Okay, the next question, it's a little longer, so bear with me here as I read it. I was reading an old blog post and got reading about how high-level athletes will do more zone 1 training due to the high loads on the neuromuscular system in zone 2. Would a similar principle apply to a larger, more type 2 muscle fiber athlete as well? I am pretty stout for an endurance athlete at 6 feet, 215 pounds, and while training for 50K last year, I noticed my recovery started to suffer as I increased zone 2 volume. While far from a high-level athlete, I would consider myself very aerobically fit for an amateur. Thank you for all your great info that you put out.
Okay, this is a really good question because, um, yes, I probably have misstated this in the past that it's only elite athletes that suffer from this. But I want to, I've tried to make it more clear that it's really about the spread between the aerobic threshold and the anaerobic threshold. When that thing gets narrow down to, in some cases, I've seen athletes where the difference between the aerobic threshold and anaerobic threshold was only, 7 or 8 beats. And that makes zone 2 very small. No, excuse me, zone 3 very small. And so and it's what's happened is that their aerobic threshold is pushed up very close to the anaerobic threshold. So that means that when they are running in zone 2, I'm using running as an example here, just because it's easy to make these kind of points that I'm trying to make. Um, when you're running in zone 2, and I'll just use an example. So let's say I'm going to use Tom Evans for an example. He's a high level ultra runner that I coach. He won Western States 2 years ago. When Tom does his zone 2, heart rate isn't as important in this case as pace, but his zone 2 running pace is about a 3-minute kilometer, maybe just a few seconds, maybe between three and depending on the day, between 3 to 3:10 or even 3:15 on a day when he's a little more tired. Well, that's roughly a 5-minute mile. Well, that's pretty fast running for most of us. And if Tom went out and every day trained at that intensity, so running at around a 5-minute or a 3-minute kilometer, 5-minute mile, 3-minute kilometer, the demand and the pounding on his legs, so the neuromuscular thing that this person was alluding to, becomes extremely high. And so you begin to develop neuromuscular fatigue. Even though metabolically he's still very aerobic at these speeds, it's just too much load neuromuscularly. So this person noticed that their recovery started to suffer. Well, this is a person that's paying attention to their training. So I commend you for that, because there's a lot of people that would not make the connection between why am I not recovering as fast? Why am I more tired more often than when I'm doing all of this type of training? So you've made the connection between too much zone 2 and increased fatigue or decreased recovery. So that's a big step. It's kind of like what Nikki and I were just talking about is, yeah, you've got all this objective data, but you need to be noticing how you feel with the training. And especially this person says they're more of a type 2 muscle fiber, so faster twitch type muscles. Then yes, a what I'd call a fast twitch oriented athlete, endurance athlete, shouldn't do very much zone 2. It's going to be really taxing on you. Whereas a slow twitch, a kind of a typical endurance athlete, that's the zone that gives them big results as long as they don't do too much of it. So they can, like, Tom would go out and do a 3 or 4 hour run, be in zone 2, moving really fast, and that's going to be a great training stimulus for someone like him with his physiology. But for a person who's more fast twitch, that's going to put them in the tank. That is going to just completely destroy them. Maybe not that day, but if they kept that up for at least a couple of 3, 4 weeks, then they would become overtrained. So yes, in this person, yes, even though you're not an elite runner, probably you have two things going for you. One is your aerobic threshold is probably pretty high compared to your anaerobic threshold, and you're more of a fast twitch athlete. Um, so I hope that answers.
Yeah, that was great. I don't think I have anything to add to that one.
Okay, well, let's jump on to the next one. This is from Matt Wilson. Um, so, training for an ultra with quite a bit of elevation gain per kilometer seems to be a significant amount of hiking, especially given some of the grades. Generally, what's your take on the stair machine versus the incline treadmill? Well, I think we've talked about stair machines earlier today. So, yes, yeah, well, two things here to say. These mountain running rate, whether it's a race or just a run with your friends in the mountains that have a lot of elevation gain and loss, that means you're going to be walking quite a bit of it. In fact, two, 3 years, 2 years ago, I think 3 years ago, when Tom Evans was third at UTMB, we went and looked at, and the UTMB has 30,000 vertical feet in 100 miles. So it's on the big vert end of that spectrum. We went and looked at the race, broke it down. Almost half the race was walking. So a lot of those steep climbs, you're walking, which it means that you better get really good at walking. Just because we all walk every day, we have since we were little, doesn't mean you're good at walking. Some of the military guys that we work with who they have to do this thing called rucking. People have probably heard of it. It means, carrying a rucksack or carrying a pack with weight in it, and usually pretty heavy weight, like, 50 pounds would be typical for a lot of these guys for some of the type of selections they need to go to. We have had some of these guys that can walk a 12-minute mile with a pack, with a 50-pound pack on. And it takes a lot of training to get good at walking that fast. So I think you need to train it. And so we do with athletes I work with, we do a lot of hiking training. And that can be, we do use the stair machine because I think it's a very effective thing, even though the speed is much lower than you would be normally. I mean, by speed, I mean the turnover, the rate of the tempo, the strides per minute, or whatever you want to call it, is much lower than you would probably be doing on a trail. But that's why we do them with weight, because we're training a muscular system. We're really not truly training the cardiovascular system. But the incline treadmill and the stair machine can both be really valuable tools for learning to walk fast uphill. The stair machine, mostly because you're going to be using a weight and getting more muscular endurance. The incline treadmill, because you can actually walk pretty fast uphill. And another thing I've noticed is that in the US, it doesn't seem like most people are using poles very much. It's not very common. When you go to Europe, if they allow it, most races, high level races, they'll have especially the best runners will have poles that they're using. And poles are another thing you need to train. So if you're doing a race or whatever this is that you're training for that has a lot of elevation gain, you would be well advised to start training with poles, walking with poles. If I don't mean walking around on flat ground, I mean uh, walking steeply uphill with poles and using the poles for propulsion, not balance.
Yeah,
So I hope that answered that for this person.
yeah, that's a great question. I just had a few quick thoughts. One was on the incline treadmill. I think it's important to make sure you know the grade that your treadmill will go. Some are just limited to 15%, where that might not be enough for, depending on the race you're looking for, something more like 30%. I think they even make them up to 40%.
Yeah,
That might
I
be
have one that goes to 40.
40. Yeah, yeah,
Um, Most of the steeper ones, like Tom uses one that goes to 25. He has, and Ruth has one that goes to 20%. But for many people, even hiking at 15%, I mean, a 15% grade is a fairly steep trail.
yeah.
Um, and
I
so
know.
you can get the benefits even from that.
Sure, sure. I was just thinking like I'm doing a race in a few weeks where some of the climbs are so, so steep. So I'm just trying to make
Yeah.
sure in my training to get out on terrain that mimics that steepness.
Yeah.
Another thing that's important to remember, this is maybe off from the question, but training, you want to make sure you're descending as well. Like if you're just doing all your climbing training on a treadmill, you'll miss the eccentric load of descending, and that's so important. That I would say
Yes.
equally important. One of the major reasons people, you know, end up dropping out or not performing well in ultras with a lot of vert is their quads just sort of give up or wear out and they can't descend any longer. So I would just make sure the descending's there. And my last really quick thought, and Scott, maybe you have a thought on this, was it's interesting to me coming off of, like, I'll do ski mountaineering training all winter and I will be ascending like many, many thousands of feet of vertical per week. I mean, sometimes sessions up to 10,000 feet in one session. So it's like my body's well acquainted with ascending. But the second I switch to hiking, I'll hike, 1,500 feet, something that's like relatively negligible, but my glutes will be so sore. So I think it's important to know, like, even these subtle uh, differences in the movement, the locomotion can really actually impact the way our bodies and our muscular system. So just a quick, I just thought that was an intro. I've always been baffled by that.
Yeah, that transitioning from ski season to running season, or even just hiking uphill, it's different. I mean, it's different muscle groups being engaged at different times. And like I would often notice when I was ski racing that I'd finish the season very fit, but I'd go out to run and oh, my legs would just give out in a half an hour because they're not used to having that eccentric loading that comes with the impact of running. And that eccentric loading is even more dramatic on the downhills. And I wrote about this in the article on the website people might want to refer to. It's training for mountain running or training for, yeah, I think it's training for mountain running. I talked about the increase in load on the muscles when you start going downhill. And there was some studies, I quote the numbers from the studies that I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but it's dramatically higher, way more than body weight, like 3 times body weight every foot strike when you're running down. I think it was even not even on that steep of a trail, 9% downhill. And they found this tripling of the load on the muscles, so 3 times your body weight. And you're right. I think that's one of the most common fatigue mechanisms is in ultra running is that your legs, your quadriceps just give up. Like you said, they check out and they end up walking everything. So
Mhm.
that's the disadvantage of the machine.
Yep. Yeah. Scott, I'll read this next one. I think it's a bit similar to one you already answered, but maybe you could add any thoughts that are specific to this question in particular. Do you have any tips for a fast twitch athlete with aerobic deficiency trying to build aerobic capacity? I grew up playing football, sprinting events, and doing CrossFit. Do you still recommend building zone 2 volume while layering on top of muscular endurance workouts once a week? Do you change this approach at all when coaching a fast twitch versus slow twitch athlete with aerobic deficiency syndrome? I've been building for a couple months up to 7 hours a week but not seeing any difference in performance. Thank you. Love the podcast.
So yes, the fast twitch athletes do need different types of training. However, I have worked with two very high level in cross country skiers who were very fast twitch, but and they were aerobically deficient when I first started working with them. And we had to do quite a bit of zone 2 training to develop that aerobic capacity that we know is so important for endurance sports. But it really, you will come to the point where even for, someone, well, at some point in your trajectory, you will come to a point where you need to not do as much zone two training. Now, if you're mixing in a much other intensity, then I don't think you really, I don't think you want to be doing that. If you're going to do any intensity during this base building phase, the muscular endurance is good thing to do. Some strides are a good thing to do. Hill sprints are a good thing to do. Um, what I wouldn't do would be high volume, high intensity. So let's say going to a hill and running hard up that hill for 5 minutes and jogging back down, doing that 6 times. That is really not good training for a fast twitch athlete. All it does is make them tired. Um, where that athlete, the fast twitch person, would be better to do, 5 times 30 seconds on a hill like that with a long recovery between. Whereas a slow twitch person, they could get a lot of benefit from doing, 5 or 6 times 5 minutes with just a 2 minute or 3 minute jog down recovery. Um, but the fast twitcher person will not respond well to that. Their intensity needs to be relatively short, relatively low volume, and with a lot of recovery time built into the workout. So anyway, I know a little more than what you asked about. But if you're getting up your aerobic training to the neighborhood of 7 hours in a week, you should start seeing some gains in aerobic threshold. But let's say you've been doing this for a couple of months. Well, it's going to take more than a couple of months, unfortunately. The aerobic system is rather slow. It responds pretty quickly, but it responds in tiny little minuscule steps. And we normally won't expect people, and especially if you're a fast twitcher, that means you're going to be slower to respond to this. But keep this up keep the CrossFit. I see you said you grew up doing CrossFit. Keep the CrossFit out of the program. That will definitely delay or kind of derail your aerobic development. Um, maybe sometime later you can begin to add that back in, but right now I wouldn't do that. But keep this up for another, 4 months or so, and I think after 6 months you will definitely begin to see that you're running faster at the same heart rate. And when you see that you're running faster at the same heart rate, that's the time to go, oh, I better redo my aerobic threshold test.
The past couple months, I've been training solely zone 1, 2 work and muscular endurance to fix my ADS. My zone 2 pace has been getting significantly slower over time, and my legs got extremely weak and fatigued. I took a deload, but still no help. I started adding some tempo runs and speed work and immediately started seeing improvements in both my zone 2 pace and higher speeds. Wondering if you could shed any light on what's going on because just doing aerobic work does not work for me.
Yeah. Well, this is pretty challenging question to be sure that I'm answering correctly, but I would be willing to guess or bet that this person is also kind of a fast twitch athlete, and that there was the zone two pace was too fast, and that they were just doing too much zone two. Because I mean, if you're training consistently, this is a rule of thumb you can use. I think you can apply a lot of different ways in a lot of different places, but I've always seen it to be true. If you're training consistently and, not like, I mean, you're not skipping 10 days between workouts, but if you're training consistently and you are not getting fitter, then in this case, we might be measuring fitness by your speed, or you notice things like, your legs are really tired, that's because you're overtraining and you're getting tired. So it's not because you're becoming less fit, it's because you're getting too tired. So in a case like that, I would say, okay, yeah, first you need to deload, and how long that deloading period is. Hopefully you haven't dug yourself into such a deep hole that it needs to be 2 months long. because then you lose all the fitness you've built. But, maybe it needs to be 2 weeks instead of 1 week where you're just walking during that period, doing light aerobic work. But it does sound like you've turned this around by adding, some tempo runs and speed work. Um, that would be, you probably lowered your overall running volume. And I would also think that maybe the workouts that were not tempo or speed work were maybe done down there in zone one, something easier so that you could recover from them better. And that's why you began to see the improvement is that you dropped the volume and you added some quality into your training. So, my guess is that what you were seeing was an issue with overtraining and getting excess fatigue. So I would caution anyone who sees a decrease in performance, despite the fact that they're doing all the training. When you see that, that should be a red flag, and you should say, okay, something's gone wrong here. I'm not getting fitter, because unless you have some kind of medical problem, you should get fitter with training, or your training's not working. So I'm glad this person took the initiative to try something different, and it sounds like it's working for you. But again, when my shedding light on this is only to make a guess that I'm pretty sure actually that it's some overtraining issue. Okay, next question. This is from Lillian Pertineva. I hope I pronounced that, Lillian, correctly. And that is, how should I map recovery during the training process, and how do I understand it? How should it look? You want to tackle that one, Nikki?
Sure. I mean, with our custom coaching, it's quite typical to build in what you might call a recovery week or a deload week. Often with my athletes, it's like we'll have blocks of training, and we would say build over the course of 3 weeks, where it's progressively maybe more volume or more intensity. And then I would program in a recovery week or a deload week where we're just backing off everything a bit. And for perhaps a higher level athlete, it doesn't have to be a whole lot. Maybe for a newer athlete, you can do a pretty substantial deload just to make sure that person is absorbing the training. We're not overreaching or overextending. And so you do that over and over again. So build, recover, build, recover. That's, pretty typical. I would say too, the benefit of custom coaching is we're in touch with athletes, every day. And so when I see an athlete say something like, this was hard or I'm tired, multiple days in a row, that to me is a red flag that this person might be overtrained or we need to pull it back. So, like I talked about with Scott earlier in this podcast, trusting the intuition of the athlete and trusting what they're saying is so important. So, we're always sort of weary. I mean, Scott has like legitimate trauma from like which because he's way too hard on himself, but overtraining, athletes and now a few in the past where it is you're like writing this fine line, and it's so hard, especially with pros, to know precisely where that is. But I think Evoke coaches in general are weary of overtraining, so we're pretty dubious about when we see red flags like that. We are paying attention.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so recovery is critical because that's when you get fitter. It's important to respect that training process and that your body needs time to adapt to the stress you've just applied to it and become a bit stronger so you can apply that stress again effectively. And if you just keep beating yourself down, that's like that question I was just answering for the person who felt like they were slowing down is if you probably weren't recovering enough, probably doing the training, too much, too hard, too soon kind of thing. Um, there are different other tools that people use that can be effective. You can monitor heart rate variability. It's not the greatest on a daily basis, but on a trend basis, it can be helpful. Even resting heart rate, again, measured looking at it on a trend. But if you if you, let's say you have established that your resting heart rate is, just around number like 60 beats per minute, you've determined that that's your normal resting heart rate. And, one morning you wake up and you take it at the same time in the same way, and it's 72. Well, then that's a red flag. Something has happened. Either you're getting sick, you didn't sleep well, you're not recovered, and you would need to adjust training. So monitoring those kinds of feedback systems can be a way that can be really helpful. Another way that I used to use when I was coaching, especially the junior skiers years and years ago, was that, and we didn't have training peaks and we didn't have heart rate monitors. Well, we had, some of them had heart rate monitors. We certainly didn't have heart rate variability. So what I would do is have every kid in their training log give the workout of the day a grade, A, B, C, D, F. And if they saw more than two C's or two, or like if they had a D workout, then we needed to probably take a break, take a rest day. But if they had anything like a couple of C's, a D, and certainly if you have an F where you have to stop the workout, that's a big sign that something's wrong. But given not every workout's going to be an A and a B. And it's okay to have the occasional C workout. That's just fine. That's, it's going to happen. But if you start seeing a trend where if you had to give yourself a letter grade for that workout and how it felt, and you start seeing, wow, this week I had 4C workouts, then that would be a sign. Like in this case, I would have the kids say, hey, coach, I got 4Cs this week in training. And I would say, okay, you're not going to practice today with us. So that's another, it's very simple, and it's purely subjective. But I think well, thanks everyone for writing in your questions. We do have a few that we were not able to get to that we will attack in they'll go to the front of the line for the next one of these. So we'll record later the month of June. But please do keep your questions coming in. And thank you, Nikki, very much for helping out. This was fun. I'm really glad we got a chance to do this together.
Absolutely. That was great. And clearly our audience is a sharp bunch because these are good questions.
They're getting sharper and sharper. Yeah, these are very, very different than the questions we used to start. We started with, a year and a half ago when we first started taking these kinds of questions. So,
Yeah.
all right, we'll see everybody next month. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.